At their date, the millionaire abandoned her like garbage. Weeks later, he begged on his knees for forgiveness. She spent hours preparing that night, carefully curling her hair, reapplying lipstick with trembling fingers. Eleanor had been invited by her husband Richard, a millionaire known for his charisma and success, to a prestigious gala. He rarely asked her to join him in public anymore, so this invitation felt like hope. A sign that maybe, after all these distant months, he was remembering the woman she used to be in his eyes. The crystal chandelier in their Chicago penthouse cast a soft glow across the marble floors as she moved through their home, a space that once felt warm but now seemed cavernous with their growing estrangement. Her dress, deep crimson, shimmered, slightly under the apartment's dim light. She had saved for months, skipping little luxuries, just to afford something beautiful. As she stepped into her heels and caught her reflection, she whispered, "Tonight I will shine again." The familiar ache of uncertainty tightened in her chest, but she pushed it away. Tonight would be different. The limousine ride downtown was filled with silence. Richard checked his phone repeatedly, his jawline tense in the blue glow of the screen. Eleanor watched the city lights blur past the window, each one a star in her universe of hope. But the moment they entered the ballroom of the Palmer House, Richard let go of her hand. The ornate ceiling with its intricate murals seemed to spin above her as he disappeared into the crowd, effortlessly mingling with businessmen and flashing cameras. Eleanor searched for him through the laughter and clinking glasses, only to find him standing by the fountain, his hand grazing the lower back of a young woman. Susan, his assistant, blonde, smiling, familiar. Eleanor froze. Something inside her knew what was coming, yet still hoped it wasn't true. The champagne in her glass trembled with her hand as conversations around her faded into a distant hum. Then Richard took the stage. "Life gives us the chance to be honest," he said to the room, microphone in hand. "Tonight, I want you all to meet the woman I truly love." He looked toward Susan, whose perfect smile gleamed under the spotlight. Eleanor's legs nearly gave out. Murmurs and gasps filled the air, and for a few long seconds all she could hear was her heart pounding. People turned to look at her, some with pity, others with cruel curiosity. The room seemed to contract around her, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. She turned, stumbled out of the room, and fled into the cold Chicago night. Her heels clacked against the pavement as she hurried away from the building, tears blurring the city lights into streams of color. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The taxi ride home was a blur. Her makeup stained her hands as she wiped her tears. When she reached the door of their Gold Coast mansion, her key didn't work. Changed locks, no warning, no explanation, just exile. The security guard she had greeted every morning for 5 years now looked at her with practiced indifference. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison. I have orders not to let you in." Eleanor stood there, the night air cutting through her thin dress, reality sinking in like ice water into her veins. He had erased her from their home, their finances, their life. She checked her phone, dozens of unanswered calls to Richard. The only message that came was from a lawyer. All communication should now go through legal channels. With nowhere to go, she rented a cheap motel room in Rogers Park. The mattress sagged, the faucet dripped, and the silence was unbearable. Each morning she woke up, hoping it was all a dream, and each morning the cracked ceiling and peeling wallpaper reminded her it was very real. The contrast between this cramped space and the luxury she had grown accustomed to made her stomach churn with anxiety. Would she ever recover from this fall from grace? But what truly haunted her wasn't the loss of wealth. It was the public humiliation, the betrayal by the man who had once vowed to cherish her above all others. What had changed? When had she become so disposable? Will Eleanor find the strength to rebuild her life after such devastating betrayal, or will she crumble under the weight of her humiliation and loss? Her friend Margaret was one of the few who stayed. One night Margaret called, sobbing. "He's posting photos from the Maldives with her, Eleanor. They're laughing." The pictures showed Richard and Susan on a yacht, the same one where he had proposed to Eleanor 6 years ago. Eleanor said nothing. She hung up and stared at the wall for hours. That night she sold her wedding ring. Days later, her jewelry, finally her car. The little money helped for a while, but her spirit was hollowed out. She wandered Chicago's streets, past the boutiques on Michigan Avenue where she once shopped without looking at price tags, past the restaurants where maitre d's had greeted her by name. Now she was invisible. The city continued its rhythmic pulse while she felt increasingly disconnected from its beat. Her old friends stopped calling. Many were Richard's business associates first, and loyalty in their circle was determined by influence and wealth. Eleanor had neither anymore. Margaret suggested she file for divorce, fight for her share, but the thought of facing Richard in court, of being portrayed as the discarded wife seeking revenge, made her physically ill. "I just need time," she told Margaret. But time seemed to be her enemy, each day eroding what little confidence remained. One evening, while organizing her things to leave the motel, she found a forgotten photo. Her 22-year-old self on graduation day from Northwestern University, eyes full of ambition. That girl wanted to run her own business, travel the world. That girl had disappeared long ago, slowly replaced by Richard's version of a perfect wife. Ornamental, agreeable, fading into the background of his success. Eleanor clutched the photo to her chest. "I'm going to find you again," she whispered. The next morning she walked into a small cafe and applied for a job as a barista. The manager looked at her skeptically, a woman in her 30s with manicured nails and no service industry experience. "Why do you want to work here?" he asked. Eleanor looked him straight in the eyes. "Because I need to start somewhere," she replied. The honesty in her voice must have resonated because he gave her a chance. She worked tirelessly, learning the rhythm of the cafe, memorizing orders, smiling through exhaustion. Her hands blistered from handling hot equipment, but each night she fell asleep with a new sense of ownership over her life. One regular customer, an older woman named Dorothy, noticed Eleanor's quick mind and careful attention to detail. "You're wasted here, dear," she said one morning. "My son's company is looking for an administrative assistant, someone organized, discreet, smart. Would you be interested?" Will Eleanor take this unexpected opportunity to rebuild her career? And what awaits her if she steps into this new world? The email came unexpectedly. Lakefront Industries invited her to an interview. Eleanor pressed her only decent outfit, shined her shoes, and walked into a skyscraper of glass and steel. The elevator climbed to the 42nd floor, each floor marking the distance from her past life. The man behind the desk didn't even look up when she entered. "I'm Thomas Clark. I expect results, not excuses. Can you deliver?" His voice was clipped, his attention fixed on the documents before him. "I can," she replied, surprised at her own confidence reverberating through her. She got the job, and the work was grueling. Thomas was cold, demanding, and meticulous, but she endured. On her third week, she caught a mistake in a high-value contract and hesitated before showing him. The old Eleanor would have remained silent, afraid of overstepping. But that Eleanor was gone. When she finally pointed out the error, Thomas scanned the paper, then nodded once. "Correct it. Good catch." That moment lit a spark. Eleanor realized she could be valuable beyond her appearance or her role as someone's wife. She had skills, intelligence, and resilience she had forgotten existed. Weeks became months. Eleanor started to shine again, not in ballrooms but in boardrooms. Her instincts sharpened, her confidence rebuilt. Slowly, Thomas's tone softened. The man who once grunted greetings now asked for her opinion on business matters. The other employees noticed the shift too, some with curiosity, others with respect. Eleanor moved into a modest apartment in Lincoln Park. She studied at night, took online courses, updated her skills, and somewhere along the way, Thomas began to see more than just an assistant. She noticed it in the way he lingered after meetings, the extra coffee he placed on her desk with no explanation. One evening, she stayed late to finish a project. Thomas appeared at her doorway. You don't have to prove yourself every day, you know, he said quietly. Eleanor looked up, surprised. I think I do, she replied. Not to me, he said. You already have. Something in his genuine tone made her breath catch. For the first time in months she felt seen, not as a decoration or a function, but as a person of value. Have you ever had to completely rebuild your life after a devastating loss? Or do you know someone who has had to start over from scratch? Share your experience in the comments. The relationship grew slowly. Their connection deepened through late nights preparing presentations, sharing takeout dinners while analyzing market trends. It was different from anything Eleanor had known, built on respect, shared goals, and genuine appreciation. Thomas never asked about her past, and she never volunteered the information. But one night during a business dinner he asked, "Why did you really take this job, Eleanor?" She hesitated, swirling the wine in her glass. "Because I had nothing left, I needed to start over." "I know that feeling," he said quietly. From that moment, something shifted between them. Thomas shared his own story of failure and rebirth, a TE business partnership that had collapsed, leaving him to rebuild from nothing. Their shared experiences of loss and resilience formed a bridge between them. Unlike her relationship with Richard, which had been built on her admiration for his success, this connection felt equal, honest. Eleanor began to see Chicago through new eyes, not as the city where she had been humiliated, but as the place where she was rediscovering herself. The lakefront, once a reminder of elegant parties on Richard's yacht, became her thinking place where she could watch the sunrise and feel possibilities expanding before her. Thomas never pushed for more than she was ready to give, and that patience allowed her heart to heal at its own pace. 6 months into her new life, Eleanor was promoted to project manager. Her team respected her insight and leadership. She had friends now, real ones who knew nothing of her former life as Richard Harrison's wife. One weekend, Thomas invited her to his family's summer home in Michigan. "No pressure," he said, "just a break from the city." Among the trees and beside the quiet lake, Eleanor felt the final pieces of her old self falling away. Thomas's family welcomed her without judgment, his mother teaching her to make blueberry pie, his father showing her his workshop where he carved wooden sailboats. Here was a family built on substance rather than appearance, on love rather than social standing. One evening, while walking along the shore, Thomas took her hand. "I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor," he said simply. "Not because you're perfect, because you're real." Instead of panic, Eleanor felt calm wash over her. "I'm falling in love with you too," she replied, "and that terrifies me." He nodded, understanding. "We have time," he said, "all the time we need." Could this unexpected love be Eleanor's second chance at happiness? Or will the shadows of her past return to threaten her newfound peace? Then, at an international investment summit at the Chicago Convention Center, Eleanor stood confidently delivering a pitch that captivated the room. In a tailored navy suit, with her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, she commanded attention not with beauty alone, but with intelligence and poise. When she stepped down from the stage, applause still ringing, she caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Richard, disheveled, hollow-eyed, alone. The sight of him sent a jolt through her system, not of longing but of recognition. This man had once been the center of her world, and now he was just a person in a crowd. Richard followed her outside. "Eleanor," he called, desperation seeping into his voice. "Please, I was wrong. I need you." He looked different, the confident swagger replaced by hunched shoulders, the gleaming smile now strained. "Susan left me," he continued. "The company is struggling. I made a mistake." Eleanor looked at him, calm and composed. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. "You humiliated me, left me with nothing. And now that you're empty, you remember me?" Richard stepped closer. "We can fix this. I still own the house. Your clothes are still there. We can go back to how things were." The offer hung in the air between them, a return to luxury, to status, to a life many would envy. But Eleanor could only see the prison it had become. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the convention center plaza, heedless of the curious onlookers. "Please, I made a mistake. I see it now." His voice cracked with emotion that might have moved her once. Behind her, Thomas stepped forward. "Everything all right?" he asked, his presence steady and reassuring. Eleanor smiled softly. "Perfect." She turned to Richard. "You taught me the value of being discarded. Thank you." The words held no bitterness, only acknowledgement. Richard's face crumpled as he watched Eleanor walk away with Thomas, their hands linked, their steps in perfect rhythm. Later that evening, in Thomas's apartment overlooking the lake, Eleanor recounted the entire story of her marriage and its collapse. Thomas listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he said, "I wish I could have known you then, if only to tell you that you deserved better." Eleanor shook her head. "I wouldn't have believed you. I needed to learn my own worth." Thomas nodded, understanding that some lessons can only be learned through fire. "And now?" he asked. Eleanor looked out at the city lights reflected in the dark waters of Lake Michigan. "Now I know that losing everything was the only way I could find myself." Is Richard's desperate plea for reconciliation sincere, or is he merely seeking to reclaim what he so carelessly discarded? And will Eleanor's newfound strength be enough to resist the pull of her past life? As winter turned to spring, Eleanor's professional success continued to grow. Lakefront Industries was thriving under the strategic planning team she now led. Her relationship with Thomas deepened, built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. They moved in together, creating a home that reflected both their tastes, warm, intellectual, alive with conversation and shared dreams. One evening, as twins, they prepared dinner together. Thomas mentioned a new opportunity. "The board is considering opening a London office," he said casually. "They want someone to head it up for the first year." Eleanor paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "Are you considering it?" Thomas met her eyes. "Only if you'd consider coming with me." The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. A new city, a new challenge, a new chapter together. Eleanor thought of the graduating girl in the photograph, the one who had dreamed of seeing the world. "I think she would say yes," Eleanor whispered. Thomas looked confused. "Who?" "The woman I used to be. The one I found again." That night, as Thomas slept beside her, Eleanor realized how far she had come. From the woman desperately seeking approval to someone who made choices based on her own desires and capabilities. She had built a career, a relationship, a life, not from the ashes of her marriage, but from the core of who she had always been. The news of Richard's bankruptcy broke while Eleanor and Thomas were planning their move to London. Financial irregularities had been discovered in his companies, investments had failed, and the empire he had built was crumbling. Eleanor felt an unexpected pang of sympathy, not for the loss of his wealth, but for the loss of his identity. She knew too well how it felt to have the ground disappear beneath your feet. One afternoon, as she was packing up her office, her assistant announced a visitor. Margaret stood in the doorway, looking both apologetic and determined. "He's asking." "For you," she said without preamble. "Richard, he's in trouble, Eleanor." Eleanor sighed. "His troubles aren't mine anymore, Margaret." Her friend shifted uncomfortably. "I know, but he has no one else. Everyone abandoned him when the money ran out." The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor, how quickly the social circle had dissolved when Richard could no longer maintain the lifestyle that had drawn people to him. "What does he want from me?" Eleanor asked. Margaret hesitated. "Advice. On starting over." Eleanor laughed, a short, surprised sound. "And he thinks I can help with that?" "You're the only person he knows who's done it successfully," Margaret replied. Eleanor sat silent for a long moment. The anger she had nursed had long since burned away, leaving only clarity in its wake. "Tell him to meet me at the cafe where I used to work, tomorrow at noon." When Margaret left, Thomas appeared in the doorway. "You sure about this?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. "I'm not doing it for him, I'm doing it for me, to close that chapter completely. The cafe was busy when Richard arrived, looking smaller somehow in his off-the-rack suit. Eleanor watched him search the room, his eyes passing over her twice before recognition dawned. She had changed, not just in appearance but in essence. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. His hands fidgeted with the paper napkin. "I don't know where to start." Eleanor studied him, this man who had once occupied all the space in her life. "You start by accepting that the old life is gone," she said simply. "You grieve it, and then you build something new." Richard looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. He had expected recrimination, perhaps even satisfaction at his downfall. Instead, he found compassion, not the eager, pleasing kind she had once offered, but something steadier, more grounded. "I don't know who I am without the money," he admitted. "I never had to find out," Eleanor nodded. "That's your first task, then, to discover who Richard Harrison is when he's not defined by his bank account." They talked for an hour. Eleanor shared practical advice about starting over, about finding work, about rebuilding self-worth. As they prepared to leave, Richard asked one last question. "Are you happy, Eleanor? Truly?" She thought of Thomas, of their plans, of the woman she had become. "Yes," she said, "not because of what I have, but because of who I am." Richard nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I think that's what I missed with you. I saw what you added to my life, but I never really saw you." 3 weeks later, Eleanor and Thomas boarded a plane to London. As the aircraft lifted, from O'Hare International Airport, Eleanor watched Chicago recede beneath her. The city had witnessed her greatest humiliation and her most triumphant rebirth. It would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her limits. In London, they built a life together that expanded beyond anything Eleanor had imagined in her previous existence. Her professional reputation grew internationally. She mentored young women navigating male-dominated industries. She and Thomas, married in a simple ceremony by the Thames, surrounded by friends who knew and celebrated the authentic Eleanor. Occasionally, news of Richard reached her. He had taken a teaching position at a business school, sharing lessons from both his rise and his fall. He had married again, not a trophy wife, but a professor of literature who challenged him intellectually. Eleanor was glad for him, in a distant way. They had both found paths forward, though they had needed to lose each other to find themselves. On their first anniversary, Thomas surprised Eleanor with a framed photograph, the picture of her graduation day that had inspired her rebirth. Beside it, he had placed a recent image of her speaking at a conference, confident and radiant. "From seed to bloom," he said, arms wrapped around her waist. "I'm so proud of the woman you've always been." Eleanor leaned back against him, content in the knowledge that her worth was no longer tied to someone else's perception. She had been humiliated, erased, cast aside, but in her lowest moment, she had found herself. Not the version Richard had shaped, but the woman she was always meant to be. Strong, wise, and loved not for her silence, but for her soul. Some losses are blessings in disguise, and for Eleanor, the greatest revenge wasn't in Richard's downfall, it was in becoming someone no one could ignore. Congratulations, Type 9. In the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.